Hi, welcome back. So we're in Chapter 4, Inferential Statistics, on the discussion of hypothesis testing. Now we're going to discuss a number of factors that help you to select the right test for your analysis. So far we have come to understand the meaning of test and why we need tests. The outcome of a test, it's just a value. And what we do usually, we take this value and we compare it against another value we call the margin of error. First possible outcome that the value to be less than this margin of error. In this case, we actually reject the null hypothesis. But if it happens, if the value is larger than that margin of error, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. But the important thing is to discuss now how to choose the test. Now, to choose the right one, there are a number of factors you have to consider. Number one is about the outcome of the variable. Now, the second factor is talk about the number of samples, how many samples that we have. Now, before I tell you about this, I want to join also the third factor, and that is purpose. We spoke about this as a scenarios, actually, hypothesized value. The second purpose or the second scenario is to compare. And finally, you might try to look at a relationship or maybe a dependency. Well, you could have one sample only with one variable only. Now, this is one sample, right? This is the case of having exactly one sample. One variable, what does that mean? That we decide a certain variable and we start to select values out of that. The second possible number of samples that, again, you have one sample with two or more variables. So you might have x2 all the way to xm. The third case that you have two or more than one sample. This is the second sample, either with one variable or more than that. Now, if you would have only one sample with one variable only, obviously you will have only one purpose, and that is test against hypothesized value. Because from one variable, you can get point. Might be the x bar, variance, proportion, might be the median. Of course, I would be hypothesizing maybe a certain value at the beginning, and I want to test this point against this hypothesized value. Now, look at the second scenario. What basically you might do, obviously, you need to make a comparison. But watch carefully, since these points are drawn from the exact same sample, we call this a dependent sample, right? We are trying to compare these points from different number of variables, but from the same sample. Also, you might find something else interesting that you want to calculate or to find out whether there is a relationship between these points. Let's look at the third possible scenario. Now, what would you do basically between these points? This point from this x1, which again happens to be the same kind of a variable, but had been measured on a different number of subjects or a different sample. So you got one point here, and then you got this point here. So basically, what can you do between them? Comparison, right? And obviously, since this point happens to be from two different samples, we call this case an independent sample. So I hope this image of understanding the meaning of dependent sample and independent sample visually is clear to you. But before I close up, I want to speak about the last factor, and that's talking about the distribution for each variable and so on, whether it has normal or divided from the normality. I hope this image of these four factors, it makes sense to you. Now, I'm going to show you a kind of a roadmap following some certain logic to get to the right test. The first thing, maybe you want to check the kind of sample that you have. And then maybe based on the sample, you want to ask about the independent factor of that sample, what kind of outcome of variable that you have. And once you decide on the outcome of the variable you have, you want to ask about the purpose. Finish all of this, you will find yourself landed on a certain cell. And inside that cell, you will find number of tests that are valid or legible to be used in order to reach out to the answer. Now, let me show you how I have created, following this logic, a table will lead you exactly to the cell of the right answer of the test. Now, perhaps at the first glance, you will be looking at the table might be intimidating, but trust me, it took me really quite a long time to compose this in just one table. Now, I'm going to follow the exact logic I have constructed. First of all, how many sample I have. So I might have one sample, two sample, or more than two sample, as we said before. Now we know that the one sample, in this case dealing with one variable, will be dealing with one purpose, and that is to test against hypothesized value. Now next I want to decide on the kind of outcome I have. Could have a nominal one, ordinal one, or continuous one. Once you decide on the variable, each one of them will be associated with the right point for the test that you're looking at. So if it is a nominal, you would be testing against proportion for sure. If it is one sample, an ordinal, you will be testing against the median. If it is one sample continuous, you might be testing either against the mean or against the variance. Now, since you have decided, you will find that the number of tests or the right test according to that following logic. Let's take one more example. Say, for example, you have two samples, happens to be independent, and happens that the variables I'm looking at, the point, to be from a nominal one. So again, I will be testing in proportion. If there are two samples independent from ordinal outcome, I will be looking at the median, or continuous, I might be looking at mean or variance. And these are the tests according to the logic that I followed just now. If they are dependent, it means happens to come from one sample but on two variables. You saw that before. In this case, if happens that I have a nominal variable and I am testing again the proportion, I might have two purposes. Maybe comparison between these, the point from these two variables, or maybe finding a relationship between them. Once again, you will end up by finding the right test. In the case of the median, you might only have to deal with one test only. But in the case of a continuous, if it is mean, you again might have two purposes: to compare the means or to find if there is a relationship. Otherwise, you might also be testing only against the variance from these two variables. And if there are more than two samples, again, in the case of independent or dependent, following the logic once again, I hope it might make a good sense for you. Now, it is the time to take all this and put it in a practical way by bringing number of examples, and then we will be reading the example and trying to logically induct the right test based on our understanding. And that's exactly what we are going to do next. See you then.